Please, sir, don't sign it. That's a setup.
Poor cleaner murmured to the billionaire, "Don't sign it." And what happened next shocked everybody. A billionaire, a pen, and a single signature that could change everything. But just before the ink touched paper, the cleaner leaned in and murmured, "Don't sign it." Moments later, chaos erupted, and the truth behind that warning left everyone speechless. Before we begin, please subscribe. It's free, and it makes my day 100% better. Also like and comment where you're watching from. I would be glad to know this story goes as far as Canada, all of the United States of America, Australia, Africa, and even the United Kingdom. So let me know where you're watching from on comment section. I pray may the good God Almighty bless and preserve you all and your family. Amen. Let's begin. The fluorescent lights of Sterling Global Industries hummed their monotonous symphony as Loveth pushed her cleaning cart down the marble corridors of the executive floor. At 42 years old, her hands bore the calluses of 2 decades spent scrubbing the sins of the wealthy from their pristine surfaces. Tonight, like every night for the past 3 years, she would clean the office of Wilson Jayden, the enigmatic billionaire whose empire stretched across continents, whose decisions moved markets, and whose cold blue eyes had never once truly seen her. But tonight would be different. Tonight, Loveth would speak words that would unravel everything Wilson Jayden thought he knew about power, betrayal, and the invisible people who witnessed his life from the shadows. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 11 as Loveth approached the mahogany doors bearing the brass nameplate, Wilson Jayden, Chief Executive Officer. Her heart performed its nightly ritual of acceleration, not from attraction, but from the weight of proximity to such concentrated authority. She had learned long ago that people like Wilson Jayden existed in a different atmosphere, one where the oxygen was made of influence and the gravity was constructed from generations of wealth. She knocked softly, a formality, really. He never answered. He never even looked up. But tonight, when she pushed open the door, Wilson Jayden was not hunched over spreadsheets or barking orders into his phone. He sat perfectly still at his desk, a morn-blank pen poised above a document, his face carved from marble and moonlight. The evening light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows painted him in shades of amber and shadow, a portrait of a man standing at the edge of an irreversible decision. Loveth had seen that look before, on her father's face the night he signed away their family farm, on her sister's face the day she married the wrong man, on her own face in the mirror the morning she realized she would never escape the cycle of poverty that had claimed 3 generations of a family. It was the look of someone about to make a terrible mistake. "Good evening, Mr. Jayden," she said softly, her voice barely disturbing the heavy silence. He didn't respond. His hand trembled almost imperceptibly above the document. In the 3 years she had cleaned his office, Loveth had never seen Wilson Jayden's hand shake. She had seen them crush the careers of competitors with a signature, seen them comfort his daughter in rare moments of paternal softness, seen them grip the edge of his desk until his knuckles turned white during late-night phone calls that left him looking older and more alone than any billionaire should look. But she had never seen them tremble. Loveth began her routine, spraying and wiping surfaces with practiced efficiency. She had perfected the art of invisibility, moving through spaces without disrupting them, cleaning without being noticed, existing without requiring acknowledgement. It was a survival skill in a world that had no use for poor women of color who cleaned up after their betters. 20 minutes passed. The pen remained suspended. The document remained unsigned. Something in the air felt wrong, a thickness, a charge, like the moment before lightning strikes. Loveth's grandmother, who had raised her in a small village before she moved to the city, used to say that some moments carry the weight of destiny, that the universe holds its breath before the world changes. This was one of those moments. Against every instinct for self-preservation, against every lesson she had learned about staying silent and invisible, Loveth found words climbing up her throat like prisoners escaping a burning building. "Don't sign it." The words fell into the silence like stones into still water, creating ripples that would become tsunamis. Wilson Jayden's head snapped up, his blue eyes finally, seeing her for the first time. Not seeing through her, not seeing past her, but actually seeing her. The shock on his face would have been comical if the moment hadn't been so weighted with consequence. "Excuse me." His voice carried the sharp edge of someone unaccustomed to being addressed by the help, let alone being told what to do. Loveth's heart hammered against her ribs like a prisoner demanding release. She had just committed career suicide. She had just violated every unspoken rule of the vast divide between their worlds. But something older than fear, something deeper than self-preservation, had seized control of her tongue. "The document you're about to sign," she continued, her voice gaining strength from some unknown reservoir. "Don't sign it, Mr. Jayden. Please." Wilson Jayden set down his pen with deliberate slowness, the kind of controlled movement that preceded either violence or revelation. He leaned back in his leather chair, a throne, really, purchased at auction from a dissolved European estate, and studied this woman who had apparently lost her mind or found her courage, though in his experience, those two conditions were often indistinguishable. "You have exactly 60 seconds to explain yourself before I have security escort you out and ensure you never work in this city again," he said, his voice a perfectly calibrated instrument of intimidation. But Loveth had been poor her entire life. She had been invisible, dismissed, underestimated, and overlooked. The threat of poverty was not a weapon you could wield against someone who had never known anything else. It was like threatening to drown a fish. "I've cleaned your office every night for 3 years, Mr. Jayden," she said, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening beneath her skin. "You think I'm furniture. You think I'm part of the wall. But furniture has eyes, Mr. Jayden. Walls have ears." His jaw tightened. "Get to the point. 6 months ago, your business partner Marcus Reeves started staying late on Thursdays. He would come into your office when he thought no one was watching. But I was watching, Mr. Jayden, because no one ever thinks to watch for the cleaners. He would sit at your desk, go through your files, photograph documents with his phone." Wilson's expression shifted from anger to attention. Marcus Reeves had been his right hand for 15 years, his college roommate, his daughter's godfather, the best man at his wedding. The suggestion was absurd. And yet, 3 months ago, Loveth continued, he started meeting with a woman named Catherine Ashford in the conference room. They would wait until everyone left, but I was still here, emptying trash cans, wiping down tables, being invisible. They talked about something called Project Meridian. They talked about timing. They talked about how you wouldn't see it coming because you trusted him too much. Wilson's face had gone pale. Project Meridian was the code name for his planned acquisition of Stellar Tech Industries, a $20 billion deal that would position Sterling Global as the dominant player in quantum computing. It was the culmination of 5 years of strategic positioning, and it was so sensitive that only 4 people in the world knew about it. Marcus Reeves was one of those 4 people. Catherine Ashford was the CEO of Stellar Tech Industries. 8 weeks ago, Loveth pressed on, her voice gaining momentum like a train building speed. "I found documents in your trash. Someone had printed them and crumpled them up, probably reviewing them, making sure they had the details right before destroying the evidence. But they forgot that trash doesn't empty itself. Those documents contained financial projections for Stellar Tech that didn't match the ones you have in your due diligence files. Someone has been feeding you false information, Mr. Jayden. Someone wants you to overpay for a company that's worth half what you think it's worth." Wilson stood abruptly, his chair rolling backward and hitting the credenza with a soft thud. He walked to the windows, his silhouette dark against the glittering cityscape. Below, millions of people pursued their lives, unaware that in this office, a billionaire's empire was teetering on the edge of collapse because of words spoken by a woman who earned minimum wage. "Why should I believe you?" he asked, his voice tight. "You could be working for a competitor. This could be an elaborate scheme to sabotage this deal." Loveth laughed, a short, bitter sound that carried the weight of a lifetime of struggling to be believed. "Mr. Jayden, I make $12 an hour. My daughter needs braces I can't afford. My mother needs medicine I have to choose between buying and paying rent. If someone was paying me to sabotage you, I wouldn't be here cleaning your office at 11 o'clock at night. I'd be at home, sleeping in a bed that wasn't broken, in an apartment that didn't have mold growing in the bathroom." The raw honesty in her voice cut through Wilson's defenses like a blade through silk. He turned to face her, and for the first time, he truly looked at her, not as furniture, not as help, but as a human being. He saw the exhaustion etched into the lines around her eyes, the wear in her uniform that spoke of too many washers and too few replacements, the pride that kept her spine straight despite the weight of the world on her shoulders. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked softly. "What do you gain?" Loveth met his gaze without flinching. "Nothing, Mr. Jayden." I gain absolutely nothing. But I lost my father because he trusted the wrong person. I watched our family lose everything because someone took advantage of his good nature. I saw what betrayal does, how it doesn't just take your money, it takes your faith in humanity, your ability to trust, your belief that the world has any goodness in it. I wouldn't wish that on anyone, not even a billionaire who has never once learned my name. The silence that followed was different from the one before, less heavy, more pregnant with possibility. Wilson Jayden walked slowly back to his desk and looked down at the document he had been about to sign. It was a merger agreement, one that would commit Sterling Global Industries to acquiring Stellar Tech for $19.7 billion. His entire board had approved it. His financial advisors had blessed it. Marcus Reeves had championed it with the fervor of a true believer. And it was, if this cleaner was right, a trap that would destroy everything he had built. "What's your name?" Wilson asked. "Loveth, sir. Loveth Okafor." "Loveth," he repeated, as if tasting the name, giving it weight and substance. "Tell me everything. Every detail, every conversation you overheard, every document you found. Leave nothing out." Loveth glanced at the clock. Her shift ended at midnight. If she was late clocking out, her pay would be docked. But something in Wilson Jayden's face told her that this night would change the trajectory of her life, for better or worse. She pulled over a chair, an audacious act, sitting in the presence of Wilson Jayden, and began to speak. For the next 90 minutes, Loveth reconstructed 6 months of observations with the precision of a detective and the memory of someone whose survival had always depended on noticing details that others missed. She described Marcus Reeves's body language during those Thursday night intrusions, the furtive glances toward the door, the way he photographed documents at specific angles to avoid glare, the small USB drive he plugged into Wilson's computer on 3 separate occasions. She recounted conversations she had overheard while changing trash bags in the conference room, fragments of dialogue that had seemed meaningless at the time but now assembled into a damning mosaic of betrayal. Catherine Ashford's voice, cool and calculating. "He trusts you completely. He won't even question the numbers." Marcus's response, heavy with guilt but committed to the path. "I know. That's what makes this so easy. And so hard." Loveth described finding shredded documents in Marcus's office, papers torn into confetti-sized pieces that she had been instructed to dispose of immediately. But Loveth had learned long ago that rich people's trash often contained valuable things, loose change, dropped jewelry, receipts that could be returned for cash. She had developed the habit of quickly sorting through refuse before bagging it. One night, driven by curiosity and a growing sense of unease, she had taken a bag of those shredded documents home. It had taken her 3 weeks, working late into the night after her daughter fell asleep, to piece together enough fragments to read what they said. They were internal memos from Stellar Tech, detailing production delays, failed quality control tests, and a looming patent lawsuit that would cost the company billions. None of this information appeared in the due diligence materials Wilson had been given. "I kept the reconstructed documents," Loveth said quietly. "They're in a storage unit. I didn't know what to do with them. I thought about going to the police, but what would I say? I'm a cleaner who stole trash from a billionaire's office? I thought about sending them to you anonymously, but I was afraid you wouldn't believe it, that you'd think it was a prank or a competitor trying to poison the deal." Wilson sat motionless, his mind racing through implications and connections. Everything Loveth described aligned with subtle inconsistencies he had noticed but dismissed. Marcus's unusually aggressive push to close the deal quickly. Catherine Ashford's surprising willingness to accept terms that favored Sterling Global, or seemed to. The way his financial advisors, who normally questioned everything, had been uncharacteristically united in recommending the acquisition. "Marcus has been meeting with your financial advisors," Wilson said slowly, pieces clicking into place. "Has he been meeting with them here?" "Yes, sir. Wednesday afternoons, in Conference Room B. They started about 4 months ago." "And you were there?" "Emptying trash, refilling water pitchers, being invisible." Wilson pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly. After a moment, he looked up. "I'm sending you an email. Check your phone." Loveth fumbled for her cheap smartphone, cracked screen and all, and opened the email. It contained a single PDF, a financial statement for Stellar Tech Industries, dated 2 weeks earlier. "Does this match what you saw in the reconstructed documents?" Wilson asked. Loveth studied the numbers, her brow furrowed. Despite her lack of formal education, she had a natural facility with mathematics, a talent that had never been cultivated, that had withered in the harsh soil of poverty where gifts were luxuries no one could afford to nurture. No, sir. The revenue numbers are about 30% higher in this document, and there's no mention of the lawsuit. According to the papers I pieced together, Stellatech is being sued by a consortium of universities claiming patent infringement on their quantum encryption algorithms. The lawsuit seeks $15 billion in damages. Wilson's expression turned to stone. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. It rang 4 times before a sleepy voice answered. Jonathan, I need you to run a comprehensive background check on Marcus Reeves. Financial records, personal accounts, real estate holdings, communications, everything. I need it done quietly, and I need it done by morning. He paused. Because I'm paying you an obscene amount of money to ask questions when I tell you to ask them, not before. 6 a.m. Jonathan. Not a minute later. He ended the call and turned back to Loveth. If what you're telling me is true, if even half of it is true, then Marcus hasn't just betrayed me. He's orchestrated the most elaborate corporate fraud I've ever encountered. The question is why? Money, Loveth said simply. It's always money, isn't it? Not always. Sometimes it's revenge. Sometimes it's ideology. Sometimes it's just the thrill of proving you're smarter than everyone else. Wilson walked to a cabinet and pulled out a bottle of scotch that cost more than Loveth made in 3 months. He poured 2 glasses without asking if she wanted one and placed one in front of her. I don't drink, sir, she said. Tonight you do. Tonight we both do. Because either you've just saved my company from destruction, or you've woven the most creative lie I've ever heard, and either way, this situation calls for scotch. Loveth picked up the glass hesitantly. The amber liquid caught the light, looking like captured sunlight. She had never tasted anything that cost more than $10 a bottle. She took a small sip and tried not to cough at the burn. Wilson smiled, an actual, genuine smile that transformed his face from marble to flesh. It's an acquired taste. Like trust. Like truth. They talked until 3 in the morning, Wilson and Loveth, billionaire and cleaner. 2 people who should never have shared a conversation now bound together by the strange intimacy of conspiracy. Wilson asked questions, hundreds of them, and Loveth answered with a clarity that came from 3 years of silent observation. She described the layout of Marcus Reeves's personal office, the habits that revealed his character. How he kept a photo of his ex-wife on his desk but turned it face down during phone calls with his current girlfriend. How he was always polite to junior employees when others were watching but would snap at assistants when he thought no one could hear. How he kept a private journal in his desk drawer, one he wrote in compulsively during stressful periods. How do you know about the journal? Wilson asked. Because I clean his office too, Mr. Jaden. And 3 months ago, he left it open on his desk. I didn't mean to read it, but it was open to a page that said, Wilson suspects nothing. The fool still thinks I'm his friend. By the time he realizes what I've done, I'll be in the Caymans with enough money to never worry again. Wilson's glass stopped halfway to his lips. You read that 3 months ago, and you said nothing. I thought about it every day, sir. But who would believe me? A cleaner accusing a senior executive of planning to betray the CEO. I'd be fired, blacklisted, possibly arrested for false accusations or for snooping where I didn't belong. I have a daughter to feed, Mr. Jaden. I can't afford to be a hero. But you're being one anyway. No, sir. I'm just trying to sleep at night. There's a difference. Wilson studied her face in the dim light of his office, this woman who had seen him at his most vulnerable and most blind, who had witnessed his life from the margins and understood things about him that he had never understood about himself. Tell me about your daughter, he said suddenly. The question caught Loveth off guard. Sir. Your daughter. You mentioned she needs braces. Tell me about her. Loveth's face softened in a way that made her look younger, less burdened. Her name is Joy. She's 14. She's brilliant, Mr. Jaden, straight A's, president of her debate club, dreams of being a lawyer. She's everything I never got to be because I had to drop out of school in 10th grade to help support my family. She's my proof that the cycle can be broken, that poverty doesn't have to be a life sentence. And the braces. Her teeth are coming in crooked. The orthodontist says if we don't correct it now, she'll have problems her whole life, pain, difficulty eating, self-consciousness that will undermine her confidence. The treatment costs $8,000. I've been saving for 2 years. I have $1,900 so far. Wilson was quiet for a long moment. Then he opened his desk drawer and pulled out a checkbook, an actual paper checkbook, a relic in an age of digital transfers, but somehow fitting for a man who valued the weight of tangible commitments. "What are you doing?" Loveth asked, alarm rising in her voice. "I'm writing you a check for $50,000. Mr. Jaden, I can't. You can and you will. $10,000 for your daughter's braces. $10,000 for your mother's medicine. The rest is payment for services rendered. You've just provided me with intelligence that could save my company billions of dollars. In the corporate espionage world, that information would be worth millions. I'm giving you $50,000, and you're going to take it because you've earned it, and because I'm a businessman, and businessmen pay for value received." Tears welled in Loveth's eyes, not tears of joy, exactly, but something more complex. Relief, certainly. Gratitude, yes. But also grief for all the years she had struggled alone, for all the time she had gone without, for all the nights she had lain awake wondering how she would survive the next month, the next week, the next day. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say you'll do one more thing for me. Say you'll stay silent about this conversation until I tell you otherwise. If Marcus has corrupted my financial advisors, if this conspiracy goes as deep as I think it does, then I need to move carefully. I need to gather evidence before anyone realizes I know. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir." "And Loveth, starting tomorrow, you're no longer a cleaner. You're a consultant to the CEO's office. Your salary is $200,000 a year. You'll have benefits, healthcare for you and your family, a retirement plan. You'll work normal hours, no more night shifts unless you choose them. Your job will be to observe, to tell me what you see, to be the eyes and ears I clearly haven't had." Loveth couldn't speak. She could only nod, tears streaming down her face, her whole body shaking with the force of a life that had just transformed in the space of a single conversation. Wilson stood and extended his hand. "Thank you, Loveth Okafor. You may have just saved my life's work. I won't forget it." She took his hand, rough, calloused fingers meeting soft, manicured ones, and felt the world shift beneath her feet. Wilson Jaden did not sleep that night. After Loveth left, he sat in his office reviewing 3 years of Marcus Reeves's decisions through the lens of suspicion, and patterns emerged like code breaking through encryption. Projects that had failed mysteriously. Acquisitions that had gone wrong. Investments that had lost money. Each one, viewed in isolation, could be explained as bad luck or market conditions. But viewed together, they formed a picture of systematic sabotage. At 5:47 a.m., his phone buzzed. Jonathan Crawford, his private investigator, had delivered as promised. The email contained 37 pages of documentation, and by page 3, Wilson felt physically ill. Marcus Reeves had gambling debts totaling $4.3 million, owed to people who didn't send reminder letters. They sent enforcers who broke fingers and kneecaps. He had mortgaged his house twice, borrowed against his retirement fund, liquidated his stock options. He was drowning in a sea of his own making, and someone had thrown him a lifeline with conditions attached. That someone was Catherine Ashford. The documentation showed wire transfers from shell companies linked to Stellar Tech to accounts controlled by Marcus Reeves. $2 million over the past 8 months, paid in installments timed to coincide with key decisions about the merger. The most recent payment, $500,000, had been deposited 3 days ago, the same day Marcus had urged Wilson to stop overthinking and just sign the damn agreement. But the truly damning evidence came from Marcus's communications. Jonathan had obtained, through methods Wilson knew better than to question, copies of encrypted messages between Marcus and Catherine. The encryption was amateur hour, the kind of thing that felt secure but crumbled under professional scrutiny. The messages detailed a scheme of breathtaking audacity. Catherine Ashford knew her company was failing. The patent lawsuit alone would bankrupt Stellar Tech. But if she could sell it to Sterling Global before the lawsuit became public, she could walk away with billions while Wilson held a worthless asset. Marcus would receive 10% of the purchase price, nearly $2 billion, for his role in facilitating the fraud. It was elegant. It was ruthless. It would have worked, but if not for a cleaner named Loveth who noticed things she wasn't supposed to notice and cared enough to speak when silence would have been safer. Wilson forwarded the entire file to his attorney with a single instruction: prepare for war. Then he did something he hadn't done in 15 years. He called Marcus Reeves at 6 in the morning and invited him to breakfast. They met at Marcus's favorite restaurant, an exclusive establishment that served $20 eggs to people who thought price was a proxy for quality. Wilson arrived first and ordered coffee, not because he wanted it, but because he needed something to do with his hands to keep them from forming fists. Marcus arrived 10 minutes late, perfectly put together, his smile easy and warm. He had the kind of face people trusted instinctively, open, friendly, with laugh lines that suggested a life spent finding joy in simple things. It was a mask, Wilson now understood. A carefully constructed facade that hid a desperate, drowning man willing to betray his closest friend for money. This is unexpected, Marcus said, sliding into the booth. You're usually at the office by 6. What's the occasion? I wanted to talk about the Stellar Tech deal, Wilson said, keeping his voice neutral. Away from the office, just the two of us. Like old times. Something flickered behind Marcus's eyes, too quick to be called fear, too present to be ignored. Sure, of course. What's on your mind? I'm having second thoughts. Now the fear was unmistakable. Wilson, we've been over this 100 times. This deal is solid. It's the opportunity of a lifetime. If we don't move now, someone else will snatch up Stellar Tech, and we'll have missed our chance to dominate the quantum computing market. I know. You're right. But something's bothering me. Call it intuition, call it cold fate, call it whatever you want. I just feel like we are missing something. Marcus leaned forward, and Wilson saw the manipulation tactics being deployed, the concerned friend, the trusted advisor, the voice of reason. You've built an empire on your instincts, Wilson. But sometimes instincts are just anxiety in disguise. The due diligence is flawless. The numbers work. The board is united. You need to trust the process. Do you remember college? Wilson asked suddenly, changing tactics. Senior year, when you talked me out of dropping out to start my first company. You said I was being impulsive, that I should finish my degree first, that the opportunity would still be there 6 months later. I remember. And you finished school, and the opportunity was still there. I was right. You were. But do you remember what you said to me that night? We were drunk on cheap beer, sitting on the roof of the dorm, and you told me that a real friend tells you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. You said that your job as my friend was to be the voice of caution when I was moving too fast, and the voice of encouragement when I was doubting myself too much. That's still true, Wilson. That's exactly what I'm doing now. Is it? Or are you the voice of encouragement when you should be the voice of caution? The silence stretched between them like taffy, sweet and sticky and ultimately too thin to hold any weight. Marcus's mask slipped for just a moment, and Wilson saw the truth underneath, the panic, the guilt, the desperate hope that this conversation would end without revelation. I don't know what you're implying, Marcus said carefully. Wilson pulled out his phone and placed it on the table. On the screen was a photograph of a reconstructed document, one of the memos Loveth had pieced together, showing Stellar Tech's real financial situation. I'm implying that you've been lying to me, Marcus. I'm implying that this deal is fraud. I'm implying that you've been paid to destroy me. The color drained from Marcus's face like water from a broken glass. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, quietly, how long have you known? Long enough. Why, Marcus? We built this company together. I trusted you with everything. Why would you do this? Marcus laughed, a broken, desperate sound. You trusted me? You trusted me to always be your sidekick, your number two, your faithful lieutenant. Do you know what it's like, Wilson, to be smart and capable and ambitious, but always standing in someone else's shadow? To have brilliant ideas that get implemented with someone else's name attached? To watch you become a billionaire while I remained merely wealthy? You have stock options worth $500 million, which is nothing compared to your $30 billion, which is nothing compared to the respect, the recognition, the acknowledgement that I'm an equal partner in this success. But I'm not, am I? I'm Wilson Jaden's right-hand man. I'm the loyal sidekick. I'm the supporting character in your story. Wilson felt something crack inside his chest, not his heart breaking, exactly, but his understanding of the world shifting, reforming into a shape that accommodated this new and painful truth. So you decided to destroy me. I decided to get what I deserved. Catherine approached me with an opportunity to become independently wealthy, to never have to answer to anyone again. $2 billion. Wilson. Enough money to build my own empire, to step out of your shadow and into my own light. And all it cost was your integrity, our friendship, and my company's future. Your company will survive. You're Wilson Jaden. You'll make the money back. But I'll finally have enough to be my own man. Except you won't, Wilson said softly, because I'm not signing the deal. And I'm handing everything I know about your scheme to the FBI. And Catherine Ashford is going to prison, and she's going to do everything she can to take you with her. The panic bloomed across Marcus's face like blood in water. You can't. Wilson, please. The people I owe money to, if they find out the deal fell through, if they realize I can't pay them back, they'll kill me. I'm not being dramatic. They will literally kill me. Then you should probably start cooperating with federal authorities. They have witness protection programs for people who help them catch bigger fish. Wilson, we are done, Marcus. Our friendship ended the moment you decided money was worth more than loyalty. Get a lawyer. You're going to need a good one. Wilson stood to leave, but Marcus grabbed his wrist. Wait. How did you know? How did you figure it out? Wilson looked down at the hand gripping his arm, the hand that had shaken his on the day they graduated college, that had clapped his shoulder at his wedding, that had held his daughter when she was baptized. The hand of a traitor. Someone who's invisible saw everything, Wilson said. Someone you never noticed was paying attention. He pulled his arm free and walked out of the restaurant, leaving Marcus Reeves sitting alone with the ruins of his ambitions scattered across the table like broken glass. Wilson spent the next week methodically dismantling the conspiracy, working closely with federal investigators who descended on Sterling Global like avenging angels. Marcus Reeves, facing both criminal prosecution and the very real threat of violence from loan sharks, sang like a canary, providing details that expanded the investigation far beyond what anyone had anticipated. The scheme wasn't just about the Stellar Tech acquisition. It was part of a larger pattern of corporate espionage involving a dozen major companies and a sophisticated network of corrupt executives who traded insider information, manipulated stock prices, and orchestrated fraudulent mergers and acquisitions. Catherine Ashford wasn't just a desperate CEO trying to save her failing company. She was a central node in a criminal enterprise that had stolen billions of dollars from shareholders across multiple industries, and Marcus Reeves, far from being her first recruit, was actually her seventh. 6 other executives at 6 other companies had been compromised, manipulated, and used to facilitate similar schemes. Marcus was just the latest in a long line of trusted advisors who had betrayed their mentors for money. The revelations made international news. The FBI held press conferences. Congressional committees launched investigations. And Wilson Jaden, who had nearly signed away his empire, became the unlikely hero of a story about corporate integrity and the importance of trusting the right people. But Wilson knew the truth. He wasn't the hero of this story. Loveth was 2 weeks after the breakfast with Marcus. Wilson called Loveth into his office. She had been working as his consultant, attending meetings, providing observations, slowly learning the language and rhythms of executive life. She wore business casual clothing now, still modest, still practical, but no longer the uniform of poverty. Her daughter's braces had been installed. Her mother had 3 months of medication stockpiled. The apartment she rented was in a building without mold, in a neighborhood where gunshots didn't punctuate the night. Her life had been transformed, but she still carried herself with the careful humility of someone who didn't quite believe the transformation was permanent. Sit down, Wilson said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. We need to talk about your future. Have I done something wrong? The fear in her voice was immediate, instinctive, the fear of someone who had spent a lifetime on the edge of disaster. On the contrary, you've exceeded every expectation I had. Your observations have been invaluable. Your insights have prevented 2 other potential problems that could have cost the company millions. You have a natural talent for reading people and situations that can't be taught. It can only be cultivated. Thank you, sir. Stop calling me sir. Call me Wilson. We are colleagues now, not billionaire and cleaner. That's going to take some getting used to. I know, but here's what I want to propose. I'm creating a new position, Director of Corporate Intelligence. The job is to do exactly what you've been doing. Observe, analyze, report. Be the eyes and ears that see things others miss. The salary is $400,000 a year, plus bonuses tied to the money you save the company by preventing disasters. Lovitha's eyes widened. Wilson, I don't have any qualifications for a position like that. I didn't finish high school. I have no formal training in business or intelligence, or you have 3 years of on-the-job training that no business school can provide. You have instincts honed by survival. You have the ability to be invisible when you need to be and visible when it matters. And most importantly, you have integrity. You didn't have to warn me about Marcus. You could have stayed silent, kept your minimum wage job, lived your quiet life. But you spoke up because it was the right thing to do. Consequences be damned. That's the kind of character I want in leadership positions. But people will question my qualifications. They'll say you're giving me the job out of guilt or gratitude, or let them say whatever they want. I own 53% of this company. I don't answer to anyone but shareholders, and the shareholders care about results, not credentials. If you prevent one major disaster per year, you'll be worth 10 times what I'm paying you. But there's more. Wilson pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk. I'm also establishing the Loveth Okafor Educational Foundation. Initial funding of $50 million. The foundation will provide scholarships, tutoring, and support services for children from low-income families who show academic promise. Your daughter Joy will be the first recipient, with full funding for high school, college, and law school if that's what she wants to pursue. Lovitha's hands trembled as she opened the folder. Inside were incorporation documents, mission statements, and a list of board members that included educators, community leaders, and Wilson Jaden himself. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Because you showed me something I'd forgotten, Loveth. You showed me that the people we overlook, the people we consider invisible, are often the ones who see us most clearly. You showed me that wisdom doesn't require wealth, that integrity doesn't need credentials, that courage can exist in the quietest voices. And you showed me that I had become so focused on building an empire that I'd stopped seeing the human beings who made that empire possible." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city that had made him rich and nearly destroyed him. "I grew up poor, Loveth. Not as poor as you, maybe, but poor enough to remember what hunger feels like, what it's like to wear the same clothes to school every day, what it's like to be dismissed and underestimated because of your address. I built this company so I'd never be poor again. But somewhere along the way, I forgot what it was like. I became the kind of person who doesn't see the cleaners, who doesn't learn their names, who thinks wealth is proof of worth. You're being too hard on yourself." "No, I'm being honest. Marcus betrayed me, yes. But I created the conditions that made his betrayal possible. I trusted him because he reflected me, wealthy, educated, from the right circles. I never questioned his advice because people like us are supposed to be trustworthy. Meanwhile, I ignored you completely, even though you were the one person in my orbit who had no reason to lie to me, no ulterior motive, no hidden agenda. You were just a human being trying to survive, who happened to have integrity when integrity mattered." Loveth wiped her eyes and stood, walking to stand beside him at the window. "You know what's funny? I used to look at people like you and think you had it all figured out. Money, power, influence. I thought those things made you immune to the problems the rest of us face. But you're just as lost as anyone else, just as capable of being hurt, betrayed, misled. The only difference is you can afford better scotch while you're suffering." Wilson laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise both of them. "That's probably the most honest thing anyone has said to me in years." "Well, you're paying me $400,000 a year for honesty, apparently. Might as well get your money's worth." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, two people from different worlds who had found unexpected common ground in the space between power and truth. "I'm going to say yes," Loveth said finally. "To the job, to the foundation, to all of it. But I have one condition." "Name it." "Hire more people like me. Not just for cleaning, but for real positions. People who've struggled, who've survived, who've seen the world from the bottom looking up. Diversity isn't just about race or gender or where you went to school. It's about perspective. It's about having people in the room who've lived different lives, who notice different things, who can spot problems that the Ivy League MBAs miss because they've never had to worry about whether they can afford rent. Wilson extended his hand. Deal. But I have a condition too. What's that? Tell me your story. All of it. Not just the last 3 years cleaning my office, but everything that came before. Where you're from, how you got here, what you sacrificed, what you survived. If I'm going to change how this company operates, if I'm going to build something that values people instead of just using them, I need to understand what I've been missing. Loveth took his hand and shook it firmly. That's going to take a while. My story isn't short or simple. I have time. And I'm learning that the complicated stories are usually the ones worth hearing. Over the next several weeks, during lunch breaks and evening conversations, Loveth told Wilson her story, and he listened with the attention of a student before a master. She had been born in a small village in Nigeria, the youngest of 7 children in a family that survived on subsistence farming and hope. Her father had been a teacher before the school closed, a man who believed education was the pathway out of poverty but who never had the resources to make that belief a reality for his own children. When Loveth was 8, drought came. The crops failed. Her father made the decision to send her to the city to live with an aunt, believing that even a hard life in the city offered more opportunities than a dying village. But the aunt was poor too, struggling to feed her own 5 children, and Loveth became more burden than blessing. 12. She started working, cleaning houses, washing clothes, running errands for families who had just enough money to pay someone even poorer to do their dirty work. She went to school when she could, learning to read and write in stolen hours between jobs, educating herself through library books and newspapers left behind by employers. 17. She fell in love with a young man who promised her a better life. He had ambitions, dreams of starting a business, plans for building a future. She believed him. They married. She got pregnant with Joy. And then he left, chasing opportunities in Europe that never materialized, leaving her alone in a city where single mothers were judged, dismissed, and economically marginalized. She worked 3 jobs to support her daughter. She cleaned offices at night, sold food in the market during the day, and took in laundry on weekends. Joy was raised by a network of neighbors and relatives who helped when they could but who had their own struggles, their own survival to worry about. When Joy was 7, Loveth made the decision to immigrate to America. It took her 3 years to save enough money for the journey, 3 years of going without food so her daughter could eat, 3 years of sleeping on concrete floors and working herself to exhaustion. She sold everything she owned, borrowed from everyone she knew, and made the desperate gamble that poverty in America might offer more opportunities than poverty in Nigeria. She was wrong and right in equal measure. America offered opportunities, yes. But it also offered different forms of poverty, different kinds of struggle. The language barrier, the cultural isolation, the constant fear of deportation, the reality that her education and work experience meant nothing in a country that measured worth by credentials she didn't have. She found work cleaning offices, and for a while, it was enough. She and Joy lived in a tiny apartment in a dangerous neighborhood, but Joy went to school, got good grades, started to dream of being a lawyer. Loveth worked night shifts so she could be home when Joy came back from school, sleeping only 4 or 5 hours a day, surviving on coffee and determination and the belief that sacrifice today meant opportunity tomorrow. Then her mother got sick. Cancer, aggressive and unforgiving. The medical bills were catastrophic. Loveth sent every spare dollar back to Nigeria, paying for treatments that only delayed the inevitable. Her mother died anyway, and Loveth had debt on top of grief, financial strain on top of emotional trauma. That's when she started working at Sterling Global Industries, cleaning Wilson Jaden's office, witnessing his life from the margins, invisible and essential in equal measure. I never meant to spy on anyone, she told Wilson. I was just doing my job. But when you clean someone's space every single night, you can't help but learn things about them. You see the photos on their desk, the books on their shelf, the documents they leave out. You hear phone conversations. You notice patterns. It's not espionage, it's just paying attention. And you noticed Marcus was betraying me. I noticed Marcus was troubled. At first, I thought maybe he was having an affair, or struggling with addiction, or dealing with something personal. The late nights, the furtive behavior, the stress, it could have been anything. But then I started piecing together what I was seeing with what I was hearing, and the picture that emerged was betrayal. Why didn't you come to me sooner? Loveth met his eyes without flinching. Because I was terrified. Because poor people don't accuse rich people without consequences. Because I have a daughter to protect and no safety net to catch us if I'm wrong. Because the world doesn't usually reward people like me for speaking truth to power, it punishes us for it. But you spoke anyway. Because at a certain point, Staying silent becomes complicity. I could live with being poor. I could live with being invisible. But I couldn't live with watching someone I'd observed for 3 years walk into a trap that would destroy him, not when I had information that could help. My father always said that character is what you do when you think no one is watching. Well, no one was watching me. You certainly weren't. But I was watching myself, and I had to be able to live with the person I saw in the mirror. Wilson was quiet for a long time after that. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. I've spent my entire adult life building this company, chasing success, accumulating wealth and power. I thought those things would make me happy, fulfilled, secure. But you know what I realized? The night you walked into my office and told me not to sign that document. That was the first time in years anyone had genuinely tried to help me without wanting something in return. Marcus wanted money. My financial advisors wanted their fees. My board wanted their stock options. But you just wanted to do the right thing. And that's worth more than any amount of money. The trial of Catherine Ashford and Marcus Reeves became a media sensation. Federal prosecutors brought charges of securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, and a dozen other counts that carried potential sentences of 30 years or more. The trial exposed the entire network of corporate corruption, implicating executives at 7 major companies and triggering a wave of investigations across multiple industries. Loveth was called to testify, and her appearance in the courtroom created a moment that would be replayed on news broadcasts for weeks. Here was a woman who had been invisible, who had cleaned the offices where crimes were plotted, who had pieced together evidence from trash bins and overheard conversations, standing before a federal judge and a jury of 12, telling her story with quiet dignity. The defense attorneys tried to discredit her. They questioned her education, her immigration status, her motives. They suggested she was lying for money, that she had fabricated evidence, that she was simply a pawn being manipulated by Wilson Jayden for his own purposes. But Loveth didn't crack. She answered every question with careful precision, referring to the reconstructed documents, citing specific dates and times, describing conversations with such detailed accuracy that even the defense attorney seemed shaken. And when Catherine Ashford's lawyer tried to suggest that Loveth couldn't possibly understand complex financial documents given her lack of formal education, Loveth responded in a way that silenced the courtroom. "You're right," she said calmly. "I don't have an MBA. I didn't go to Harvard or Yale. I didn't study finance or economics in any official capacity. But I've spent my entire life doing math that matters. Math like, if I have $47 and rent is due in 3 days and I need to buy food and medicine, how do I make it work? Math like, if I can work 3 jobs at 23 hours per week each, how much sleep can I get and still function? Math like, if my daughter needs braces that cost $8,000 and I can save $100 per month, how many years until she can smile without embarrassment? That kind of math teaches you to understand numbers in ways no classroom can replicate. So yes, I understood those financial documents, because understanding numbers has been the difference between survival and catastrophe for my entire life." The courtroom erupted in applause, an unusual occurrence that prompted the judge to bang his gavel and call for order. But the moment had been captured by courtroom sketch artists and recorded by journalists, and by that evening, Loveth's testimony had gone viral. She became, overnight, the symbol of something larger than herself, the voice of everyone who had been overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed by systems that confused credentials with competence and wealth with wisdom. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. Catherine Ashford was found guilty on all counts. Marcus Reeves, who had cooperated with prosecutors, received a reduced sentence but would still serve 15 years in federal prison. The other executives in the network faced similar fates, and the entire corporate world received a stark reminder that fraud, no matter how sophisticated, eventually unravels when someone brave enough pays attention. 6 months after the trial, Sterling Global Industries held its annual shareholder meeting. Wilson Jayden stood at the podium, looking out at a room filled with investors, analysts, journalists, and employees. The company's stock had recovered from the brief panic that followed the revelation of Marcus Reeves's betrayal. Profits were strong. The future looked bright. But Wilson didn't want to talk about quarterly earnings or market share or strategic initiatives. He wanted to talk about something more fundamental. 6 months ago, he began, I almost destroyed this company. Not through malice or incompetence, but through blindness. I was blind to betrayal happening right under my nose. I was blind to the humanity of the people who make this company function. I was blind to my own vulnerabilities and limitations. And I was blind because I had surrounded myself with people who looked like me, thought like me, came from the same world as me. I had created an echo chamber where dissenting voices were never heard because they were never invited to speak. He paused, letting the words settle over the audience. One person saved this company. One person saw what I couldn't see, spoke when silence would have been easier, risked everything to do the right thing. And that person wasn't a Harvard MBA or a Fortune 500 executive or a consultant from a prestigious firm. That person was our night shift cleaner, a woman named Loveth Okafor, who earned $12 an hour and was so invisible that I couldn't have told you her name 6 months ago if my life depended on it. He gestured to the side of the stage, and Loveth walked out, wearing a professional suit, her head held high, her daughter Joy standing beside her, smiling with newly straightened teeth. The audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted 3 full minutes. When the applause finally died down, Wilson continued. Loveth is now our Director of Corporate Intelligence, and she's implementing a program we are calling Invisible No More. It's a company-wide initiative to identify, hire, and promote talented people from non-traditional backgrounds. People who've worked their way through community college. People who've learned on the job rather than in classrooms. People who've survived poverty, overcome obstacles, and developed the kind of wisdom that only comes from genuine struggle. He looked directly at Loveth, his expression one of profound respect. Loveth has taught me that talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. She's taught me that the person scrubbing your floors might have insights that your CFO misses. She's taught me that paying attention to the people we've trained ourselves not to see isn't just ethical, it's good business. Because those people see things the rest of us are blind to. Loveth stepped up to the microphone, and the room fell silent. She had never spoken in public before, never addressed an audience larger than her daughter's parent-teacher conferences. But she had earned this moment, and she would not let fear steal it from her. When I was cleaning Mr. Jaden's office, she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart, I used to imagine what it would be like to sit in these chairs, to make decisions that affected thousands of people, to have the power to change lives with a signature. I never imagined I would actually get the chance. But here I am, and I want to tell you what I've learned from being on both sides of this divide. She looked out at the sea of faces, most of them wealthy, most of them powerful, most of them accustomed to being the ones who speak rather than the ones who listen. When you're poor, you learn to be invisible. You learn to move through spaces without disrupting them, to work without being noticed, to exist without requiring acknowledgement. You do this because visibility is dangerous when you're vulnerable. Visibility means questions about your immigration status, your education, your right to be in spaces where people like you aren't welcome. So you perfect the art of being unseen. But invisibility is a trap, because when no one sees you, no one values you. Your insights go unheard. Your talents go undiscovered. Your potential goes unrealized. You become what people assume you are, just the cleaner, just the janitor, just the person who empties the trash and doesn't matter. Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. But I did matter. My observations mattered. My attention to detail mattered. My willingness to speak truth mattered. And there are thousands, millions, of people like me, working jobs that society considers menial, possessing skills and intelligence and wisdom that go completely unrecognized because we've created systems that only see certain kinds of people as valuable. Mr. Jaden gave me an opportunity, and I'm grateful. But one opportunity for one person isn't enough. We need to change the systems that make people like me invisible in the first place. We need to create pathways for talent to be recognized regardless of where it comes from. We need to stop confusing credentials with capability, pedigree with potential, wealth with worth. The audience was transfixed. Even the hardened Wall Street analysts, who had come expecting bland corporate platitudes, found themselves moved by the raw authenticity of her words. So I'm asking all of you, Loveth continued, to look around your organizations and ask yourselves, who am I not seeing? Who's invisible in my world? Who might have valuable insights that I'm missing because I've never thought to ask them? The person who cleans your office might save your company. The person who parks your car might have the solution to your most intractable problem. The person who serves your lunch might understand your customers better than your marketing department. Visibility isn't charity. It's not about being nice to poor people or feeling good about diversity. It's about recognizing that we are all diminished when we allow talent to go to waste, when we permit entire segments of humanity to remain invisible, when we build systems that only work for people who start with advantages. She stepped back from the microphone, and the applause was thunderous, but she wasn't finished. She leaned back in and said, "One more thing. To everyone who's ever felt invisible, who's ever worked a job that people look through you to do, who's ever wondered if anyone notices your effort or cares about your struggle, I see you. You matter. Your work matters. And someday, someone will recognize what you've been contributing all along. Don't give up. Don't stop paying attention. Don't let invisibility make you believe you're actually insignificant. Because you're not. You never were." The standing ovation lasted 5 full minutes this time, and even Wilson Jaden found tears streaming down his face. The speech went viral within hours. News outlets picked it up. Social media exploded with discussions about invisible labor, economic inequality, and the value of unconventional perspectives in corporate America. Loveth became, quite suddenly, famous, a circumstance she found deeply uncomfortable but which she leveraged for maximum impact. She gave interviews, appeared on news programs, wrote an op-ed for the New York Times titled "The Economy of Invisibility." She used her platform to advocate for living wages, better working conditions for service workers, and educational opportunities for people from low-income backgrounds. The Loveth Okafor Educational Foundation began accepting applications. Hundreds came in the first week, then thousands. Stories of brilliant children trapped in poverty, of talented young people whose potential was being squandered by circumstances beyond their control, of families making impossible choices between food and education, between survival and opportunity. Wilson funded the foundation generously, but Loveth insisted they also needed to change how Sterling Global operated internally. Together, they implemented a radical restructuring. Every executive was required to spend 1 week per year working in a frontline position, not as an observer, but as an actual employee, earning the same wage, facing the same challenges, experiencing the same invisibility. The CEO cleaned offices. The CFO worked in the mailroom. The head of marketing staffed the company cafeteria. The company established a leadership development program specifically for employees in traditionally low-status positions. Janitors could attend business classes on company time. Security guards could learn coding. Administrative assistants could train for management positions. The only requirement was demonstrated potential and willingness to learn. Sterling Global created an advisory council composed entirely of frontline workers. Their role was to provide feedback on company policies, to flag problems that executives might miss, to represent the perspectives of people who experienced the organization from the bottom of the hierarchy. The council had real power. They could veto policies they believed would harm workers, and their recommendations carried weight in boardroom discussions. Most controversially, Wilson restructured executive compensation. Maximum salary ratios were implemented. No executive could earn more than 20 times what the company's lowest paid employee earned. If executives wanted raises, they had to raise wages across the board. Bonuses were tied not just to profit, but to employee satisfaction, turnover rates, and diversity metrics. The business press was skeptical. Analysts warned that such policies would drive away top talent, that executives would flee to competitors where they could earn more money with fewer restrictions, that the company would become less competitive. The opposite happened. Applications for positions at Sterling Global increased by 400%. Employee turnover dropped by 60%. Productivity soared. Innovation accelerated. It turned out that when people felt valued, when they were treated as humans rather than resources, when they had pathways to advancement and voices in decision-making, they invested themselves more fully in the company's success. Within a year, Sterling Global became the most desirable employer in its industry. Other companies began copying their policies. A movement emerged, with Loveth and Wilson as its unlikely leaders, advocating for corporate structures that valued all employees, not just those at the top. But the most profound changes happened not in boardrooms or policy manuals, but in the lives of individuals who found themselves seen for the first time. Joy Okafor, Loveth's daughter, graduated top of her high school class and received a full scholarship to Yale, where she planned to study law with a focus on labor rights and economic justice. She had written her college essay about watching her mother clean offices at night, about learning that dignity and worth weren't determined by job title or income, about the power of speaking truth when silence would be easier. Loveth's mother's medical bills were paid off retroactively, and Loveth established a clinic in her mother's name in the village where she was born, providing free healthcare to people who couldn't afford it otherwise. The clinic was staffed by doctors who had themselves grown up in poverty and understood viscerally what it meant to choose between medicine and food. Wilson Jaden discovered that wealth without purpose was just numbers on a screen. He began spending less time accumulating more money and more time figuring out how to use what he had to create opportunities for others. He established partnerships with community colleges, funded vocational training programs, invested in affordable housing developments near Sterling Global facilities so employees didn't have to commute 3 hours each day. His daughter, who had grown up in privilege and comfort, started volunteering at the Loveth Okafor Educational Foundation, tutoring children from low-income families. She told her father one day, "I always thought being rich meant being better. But Loveth taught me that being rich just means having more resources. What matters is what you do with them." Marcus Reeves, serving his prison sentence, received a letter from Loveth 1 year after the trial. In it, she wrote, "I don't forgive you for what you did to Wilson, for the betrayal, for the crime. But I understand desperation. I understand what it's like to be drowning and to grab at any lifeline, even one with terrible strings attached. I hope you use your time in prison to become someone who would make better choices. I hope you find a way to live with what you've done. And I hope that when you get out, you remember that second chances are precious gifts that shouldn't be wasted." Marcus kept the letter, reading it whenever despair threatened to consume him. It became his anchor, his reminder that redemption was possible, that mistakes didn't have to define a life forever. 2 years after the trial, just when it seemed like Sterling Global had found its rhythm, a new crisis emerged. A whistleblower from within the company alleged that one of Sterling Global's manufacturing facilities was violating environmental regulations, dumping toxic waste into a river that supplied drinking water to a predominantly low-income community. The allegations hit the press on a Monday morning. Wilson's first instinct was to deny, to defend, to protect the company's reputation at all costs. His legal team advised immediate damage control, carefully worded statements that admitted nothing while promising investigations. But Loveth walked into his office that afternoon and said, "We need to go there. Today. Right now. We need to see the facility, talk to the workers, talk to the community, and find out the truth ourselves. The lawyers say, I don't care what the lawyers say. You taught me that visibility matters, that paying attention matters, that the people closest to a problem usually understand it better than anyone else. So let's go be visible. Let's pay attention. Let's listen to the people who are actually affected instead of managing the situation from a conference room." They flew to the facility that evening, Wilson, Loveth, and a small team that included the company's head of environmental compliance and its chief operating officer. They didn't call ahead. They didn't stage a carefully controlled visit with pre-screened employees and sanitized talking points. They just showed up. What they found was damning. The facility manager, under pressure to cut costs and increase production, had indeed been bypassing environmental controls. He had ordered workers to dump waste into the river at night, had falsified inspection reports, had threatened employees who raised concerns with termination. But they also found something else, a group of workers who had tried to blow the whistle internally 6 months earlier, who had filed complaints with HR, who had attempted to go through proper channels. Their concerns had been dismissed, buried in bureaucracy, lost in the chain of command that separated frontline workers from executive decision-makers. Wilson gathered all the facility's employees in the main break room. He stood on a chair so everyone could see him, and he spoke without notes, without prepared remarks, without the careful language of corporate public relations. "I'm Wilson Jaden, and I own this company. What's been happening here is unacceptable. It's illegal, it's immoral, and it stops today. The facility manager has been fired. We are bringing in independent environmental experts to assess the damage and develop a remediation plan. And we are going to compensate the affected community for the harm we've caused." A worker in the back, a man in his 50s with tired eyes, raised his hand. "We tried to tell someone. We tried to report it. Nobody listened." Wilson felt the words like a physical blow. "I know. And that's my failure. We built systems that were supposed to protect against this, but those systems only work if information can flow freely, if workers feel safe reporting problems, if people in power actually listen to people on the ground. We failed you. I failed you. And I'm going to make it right." Loveth stepped forward. Who here tried to report the dumping? 8 hands went up. "Tell me what happened when you reported it." They told stories that were variations on a theme: concerns dismissed, threats issued, fear of retaliation, the basic impossibility of fighting a system that didn't want to hear bad news. One woman, a single mother named Rita, described being told by HR that she was overreacting and that if she continued causing trouble, her employment would be re-evaluated. "Rita," Loveth said, "how much do you make per hour?" $15. "As of today, you make $30 per hour, and you're the new assistant facility manager in charge of environmental compliance. Your job is to make sure nothing like this ever happens again. You'll report directly to me. You'll have the authority to shut down operations if you see violations. And you'll be protected, completely and absolutely protected, from retaliation. Anyone who threatens you will be fired immediately. Can you do that job? Rita stared at her in shock. I don't have any qualifications for management. You have the most important qualification. You tried to do the right thing when it was dangerous to do so. That's what I'm looking for. Everything else we can teach you. The transformation of that facility became a case study in how to rebuild trust after betrayal. Wilson and Loveth spent 2 weeks there, working alongside employees, meeting with community members, overseeing the cleanup. They established a community advisory board that had the power to inspect the facility at any time. They implemented new reporting systems that allowed workers to raise concerns anonymously without fear of retaliation. Most importantly, they demonstrated through action, not words, that the company's values weren't just marketing slogans. They were operational principles that applied even when they were inconvenient, even when they were expensive, even when they required admitting failure. The cleanup cost Sterling Global $280 million. The legal settlements cost another $120 million. The stock price took a temporary hit. But Wilson refused to compromise on doing what was right, and Loveth stood beside him, reminding him constantly that short-term pain was the price of long-term integrity. Aidan received an offer that represented everything he had once dreamed of achieving. A consortium of investors wanted to buy Sterling Global Industries for $45 billion. It was more money than he had ever imagined accumulating, enough wealth to last 1,000 lifetimes, enough to establish foundations and endowments that would change countless lives. There was just one condition. The new owners wanted to streamline operations, which was corporate speak for eliminating the expensive social programs, reverting to standard industry compensation practices, and focusing solely on maximizing shareholder value. Everything he and Loveth had built, the living wages, the development programs, the worker councils, the values-driven culture, would be dismantled within months of the acquisition. Wilson sat in his office, staring at the offer document, experiencing a profound sense of déjà vu. Here he was again, contemplating a decision that would define his legacy, holding a pen above paper, standing at the crossroads between two visions of what success means. Loveth knocked on his door. She didn't wait for an answer. They were long past those formalities. She walked in, sat down, and said, "You're thinking about taking the offer." "How did you know?" "Because I know you. And I know that even after everything we've been through, even after all the transformations, there's still a part of you that equates success with numbers in a bank account. It's hard to completely unlearn the lessons that poverty taught you." $45 billion. Loveth. Think about what we could do with that money. The foundations we could establish, the lives we could change, the programs we could fund. And think about what we'd be abandoning. The workers who believed us when we said they mattered. The systems we built to give voice to people who've never had voices. The living proof that companies can be profitable while also being ethical, that you don't have to choose between success and integrity. Wilson set down the pen. "You think I should turn it down?" "I think you should do what you believe is right. But I'll tell you what I believe. I believe that this company has become something more important than money. It's become a model, proof that different systems are possible. If you sell it, you're not just walking away with $45 billion. You're sending a message that everything we've built was just an experiment, a phase, something you're willing to abandon when the price is right. But the money could fund so many programs. The programs aren't the point, Wilson. The system is the point. You can give away every dollar you earn and never change the fundamental structures that create poverty in the first place. But if you can show that companies can operate differently, if you can prove that valuing workers doesn't mean sacrificing profits, if you can create a model that other companies want to emulate, that changes the system itself. That creates transformation at scale." She leaned forward, her eyes intense with conviction. 3 years ago, you were about to sign a document that would have destroyed you. I told you not to sign it, and you trusted me. Now I'm telling you not to sign this one either. Not because it's fraudulent, it's a perfectly legitimate offer, but because some things are more valuable than money. Legacy is more valuable than wealth. Integrity is more valuable than profit. And the company we've built together is more valuable than any number some investors can write on a check. Wilson looked at her for a long moment. Then he tore up the offer and threw the pieces in the trash. "You know what, Loveth? You're right. I spent the first 50 years of my life accumulating wealth. I want to spend the rest of my life proving that wealth isn't the only thing that matters. Sterling Global isn't just a company. It's a statement about what's possible when you value people over profit, when you treat work as partnership rather than exploitation, when you recognize that everyone has something valuable to contribute. He stood and extended his hand. Thank you. Again. For saving me from my own worst instincts. For reminding me what actually matters. For being the voice of conscience when I was tempted to compromise. Loveth shook his hand, smiling. That's what you pay me for. Well, that and noticing when your CFO is embezzling funds. Wilson froze. Wait, what? I'm kidding. Probably. I should probably check on that though. Old habits die hard. They both laughed, and in that moment, the weight of the decision lifted. Wilson felt lighter than he had in years, unburdened by the constant pursuit of more, freed from the belief that worth was measured in wealth. 5 years after Loveth Okafor first walked into Wilson Jayden's office and changed both their lives forever, Sterling Global Industries had become the model that shaped an entire industry. Over 200 companies had adopted variations of their policies. The invisible no more movement had spread across sectors and continents. Business schools taught case studies about their approach. Congressional committees heard testimony about their compensation structures. But the real legacy wasn't in the policies or the press coverage. It was in the lives transformed, one person at a time. Rita, the worker who had been threatened for reporting environmental violations, was now Vice President of Environmental Compliance, overseeing sustainability initiatives across all Sterling Global facilities. She had completed her college degree through the company's education program and had become a vocal advocate for worker protections in manufacturing. Maria, who had started as a cafeteria worker, was now Director of Human Resources, having demonstrated an intuitive understanding of employee relations that no HR certification could teach. She implemented hiring practices that valued character and potential over credentials, and turnover rates dropped to record lows under her leadership. James, a security guard who had taught himself coding by watching YouTube videos during night shifts, was now leading Sterling Global's AI ethics team, ensuring that the company's technology initiatives prioritized human welfare over efficiency. James, a security guard who had taught himself coding by watching YouTube videos during night shifts, was now leading Sterling Global's AI ethics team, ensuring that the company's technology initiatives prioritized human welfare over efficiency. Each transformation rippled outward, touching families, communities, entire networks of people who had been invisible until someone decided to see them. Joy Okafor graduated from Yale Law School at the top of her class. She turned down offers from prestigious corporate firms to instead start a non-profit legal clinic representing low-wage workers in employment disputes. On the day she argued her first case before a federal judge, Loveth sat in the courtroom gallery, tears streaming down her face, watching her daughter fight for people just like the woman she used to be. Wilson's daughter, Amanda, had found her own path. She joined Sterling Global not through nepotism but through the same rigorous hiring process as everyone else, starting in the mailroom and working her way up. She was now director of the Loveth Okafor Educational Foundation, having discovered that her privilege was a responsibility, not an entitlement. The foundation had grown beyond anyone's initial vision. It had provided full scholarships to over 5,000 students from low-income backgrounds. 73% of them had graduated from college, compared to a national average of 19% for students from similar economic circumstances. They became teachers, engineers, doctors, entrepreneurs, and activists. They became proof that talent existed everywhere but opportunity did not, and that closing that gap could transform society. On the 5-year anniversary of that night when Loveth had first spoken up, Wilson organized a company-wide celebration. It wasn't held in a fancy ballroom or exclusive venue. Instead, he rented out an entire community center in the neighborhood where Loveth had once lived in poverty, the place where she had struggled and survived and somehow maintained her integrity despite every incentive to compromise it. Thousands of people attended, current employees, former employees, scholarship recipients, community members whose lives had been touched by the ripple effects of that single moment of courage. The room buzzed with conversation, laughter, the sound of people who felt valued sharing space with people who valued them. Wilson stood at a simple podium, looking out at faces representing every race, nationality, economic background, and level of education. This, he thought, was what success actually looked like. Not numbers on a balance sheet, but humans flourishing, potential being realized, dignity being recognized. 5 years ago, he began, I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. I was about to sign a document that would have cost me everything, not just my money, but my company, my reputation, my future. I didn't see the trap because I had trained myself not to see the most important things. I had become blind to the people around me, deaf to voices that didn't sound like mine, convinced that success meant surrounding myself with people who had the right credentials and came from the right places. He paused, finding Loveth in the crowd. She stood with Joy beside her, both of them wearing expressions of pride mixed with discomfort at being the center of attention. One person saved me. A woman who earned minimum wage, who cleaned my office while I ignored her existence, who noticed things I couldn't see because I had never learned to look. Loveth Okafor didn't have to speak up. She had every reason to stay silent. But she chose courage over safety, truth over survival, my welfare over her own security. And in doing so, she didn't just save a company, she started a revolution. The crowd erupted in applause. Wilson waited for it to subside before continuing. But here's what I want you to understand. Loveth didn't save me because I deserved it. I didn't deserve it. I had been blind, arrogant, dismissive of the very people who made my success possible. She saved me because she had integrity, because she couldn't live with herself if she stayed silent, because she understood something I had forgotten. We are all connected. When one person suffers, we all suffer. When one person is diminished, we are all diminished. When we allow anyone to be invisible, we all become more blind. He stepped away from the podium and gestured for Loveth to join him. She shook her head, but Joy gently pushed her forward, and the crowd's encouragement grew louder until she had no choice but to walk to the front of the room. I hate public speaking, she said into the microphone, and the crowd laughed with affection. But Wilson's right about one thing. We are all connected. That's not just a nice sentiment, it's a practical reality. When workers are paid poverty wages, the entire economy suffers. When talent is wasted because of zip codes or skin color or lack of access to education, we all lose the innovations, the art, the leadership that talent could have provided. When we build systems that only work for people at the top, we create societies that don't work for anyone. She looked out at the faces, seeing herself reflected in so many of them. People who had struggled, survived, persevered against odds that should have crushed them but somehow didn't. I was poor for 42 years, she continued. I know what it's like to choose between food and medicine, between rent and electricity, between your own needs and your child's future. I know what it's like to be invisible, to move through spaces without anyone acknowledging your existence, to work hard and still barely survive. And I know what it feels like when someone finally sees you, when someone recognizes that you have value beyond your economic utility, when someone gives you not just charity but opportunity. Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. But we can't build a just society on individual acts of generosity. We can't rely on hoping that every poor person gets lucky enough to meet a wealthy person who decides to help. We need systems that work for everyone. We need structures that recognize human dignity as a birthright, not a privilege earned through credentials or connections. We need to stop treating poverty as a personal failure and start treating it as a systemic problem that requires systemic solutions. The crowd was silent now, hanging on her words. Sterling Global Industries isn't perfect. We still make mistakes. We still have problems to solve. But we've proven that companies can be profitable while also being ethical. We've shown that you can value workers and still generate returns for investors. We've demonstrated that the choice between profit and people is a false choice, created by people who benefit from keeping those two things separate. She turned to Wilson. This man gave me an opportunity, and I'm grateful. But more importantly, he was willing to be changed by what I showed him. He was willing to admit he'd been wrong, to acknowledge his blindness, to transform not just his company but himself. That's the real revolution, not just changing policies, but changing hearts and minds, helping people see what they've been trained not to see. Loveth looked back at the crowd. So my challenge to everyone here is this. What are you not seeing? Who's invisible in your world? Whose voice are you not hearing because you've been trained to ignore it? And what are you willing to risk to make them visible, to amplify their voice, to create space for their contributions? Because here's the truth, I'm not special. I didn't have unique gifts or exceptional talents. I just paid attention. I just noticed. I just cared enough to speak up. And every single one of you can do the same thing. Every single one of you has the power to see someone who's been invisible, to recognize value that others have missed, to speak truth when silence would be easier. That's how we change the world, not through grand gestures or revolutionary manifestos, but through small acts of courage repeated daily, through refusing to accept invisibility as normal, through insisting that everyone matters and behaving as if that's true. The applause was deafening. People were crying, embracing, celebrating not just the anniversary but the possibility it represented, the idea that different futures were possible, that systems could change, that hope was justified. Later that evening, after the crowds had dispersed and the celebration had ended, Wilson and Loveth sat on the steps of the community center, watching the sunset over the neighborhood where Loveth had once struggled to survive. "Do you ever miss it?" Wilson asked. The simplicity of just cleaning officers, not having to make decisions that affect thousands of people, not being responsible for so much. Loveth considered the question carefully. Sometimes. There's a certain peace in being invisible. You don't have to worry about letting people down, disappointing them, making mistakes that matter. But no, I don't really miss it. Because invisibility isn't peace, it's erasure. And I'd rather struggle with being seen than suffer from being ignored. "I've been thinking about that night," Wilson said. "The night you told me not to sign the document. I've replayed it in my mind 1,000 times, and I always wonder, what if you hadn't been there? What if you'd called in sick that night, or finished your shift 10 minutes earlier, or decided that speaking up was too risky? Then you would have signed it, and Marcus would have destroyed you, and I'd still be earning $12 an hour cleaning someone else's office," Loveth said matter-of-factly. "But someone else would have eventually noticed. Maybe not in time to save you, but eventually. Truth has a way of surfacing. Lies take constant energy to maintain. The conspiracy would have collapsed eventually. But by then it would have been too late for me." "Probably. But Wilson, you can't build your life on what ifs. You can only work with what actually happened and try to make good choices going forward." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching children play in the park across the street, children whose families now had healthcare, whose parents now earned living wages, whose futures held possibilities that previous generations never had access to. "What's next for you?" Wilson asked. "You've transformed this company, started a national movement, become a voice for workers everywhere. What's the next chapter?" Loveth smiled. "Honestly, I want to go back to school. I want to finish my high school diploma, maybe take some college classes. Not because I need credentials to prove I'm smart or capable, but because I want to learn for the sake of learning. I want to read philosophy and history and literature. I want to understand the world in ways I never had time to understand it when I was just trying to survive. The company will pay for it. Whatever education you want, wherever you want to study." "I know, but I'm going to go to community college, the same place where a lot of our scholarship recipients start. I want to experience it the same way they experience it, to understand the challenges they face, to be reminded of where I came from even as I celebrate how far I've come." Wilson nodded, understanding. "You know, 5 years ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I thought success was a destination you reached and then defended. But you taught me that success is a direction, not a location. It's something you move toward constantly, something that requires constant attention and effort and willingness to change." That's very philosophical for a billionaire. I learned it from a cleaner who turned out to be wiser than any consultant I ever hired. 10 years after that fateful night, Sterling Global Industries was no longer an outlier or an experiment. The model they had pioneered had been adopted, in various forms, by thousands of companies worldwide. Governments had passed legislation inspired by their practices. Business schools had revised their curricula to include stakeholder capitalism and values-driven leadership. The revolution that started with 2 words, "Don't sign it," had transformed not just a company but an entire approach to how corporations operate. Loveth Okafor, now in her 50s, had indeed gone back to school. She earned her high school diploma, then a bachelor's degree in sociology, then a master's in organizational leadership. She wrote a memoir titled Invisible No More that became an international bestseller and sparked countless conversations about class, poverty, and the systems that perpetuate inequality. But she remained, fundamentally, who she had always been, someone who noticed things others missed, who spoke truth when silence would be easier, who believed that every person had inherent worth regardless of their economic status or social position. Joy Okafor had become exactly what her mother dreamed she could be, a powerful advocate for workers' rights, arguing cases before appellate courts, winning precedent-setting decisions that protected vulnerable employees from exploitation. When people ask her what inspired her career choice, she always told the same story, about watching her mother clean offices at night, About learning that courage sometimes looks like a quiet woman whispering, "Don't sign it," to a powerful man. Wilson Jaden, now in his 60s, had achieved something more valuable than the billions he'd turned down. He had built a legacy that would outlive him. Sterling Global Industries would continue long after he was gone, but more importantly, the principles it embodied had taken root in ways that couldn't be undone. He had proven that business could be a force for good, that profit and ethics weren't mutually exclusive, that seeing people's humanity was not just morally right but economically smart. They still thought about Marcus Reeve sometimes. His former friend had been released from prison after serving 12 years. Wilson had offered him a job, not out of sentimentality, but because he believed in second chances, in redemption, in the possibility that people could learn from their mistakes. Marcus had accepted, taking a position in Sterling Global's ethics compliance department, using his experience to help others avoid the traps he'd fallen into. The two men would never be friends again. Some betrayals couldn't be undone. But they could work together toward common purposes, could coexist in a framework that valued growth over grudges. On the 10th anniversary of that night, no celebration was planned. Loveth didn't want another event, another speech, another round of attention. She had always been uncomfortable with being celebrated, preferring to work quietly behind the scenes. But Wilson insisted on marking the occasion somehow, so they did what had become their tradition. They walked through Sterling Global's offices after hours, when the building was quiet and still. They walked past the clean desks, the emptied trash cans, the spaces maintained by people who still earned more than most cleaning staff anywhere else, who had benefits and opportunities and paths to advancement, but who remained largely invisible to the executives who worked there during the day. "Do you think it's enough?" Wilson asked as they stood in his office, the same office where everything had changed. "Everything we've built, everything we've changed. Is it enough?" Loveth looked at him with the clear-eyed honesty that had defined their entire relationship. "No, it's not enough. There are still millions of people working poverty wage jobs, still millions of children going to bed hungry, still systems that perpetuate inequality and injustice. What we've done matters, but it's just a beginning, not an ending." "That's what I thought you'd say." "But Wilson, it's also more than enough. Because we didn't set out to solve every problem or fix every injustice. We set out to prove that different choices were possible, that companies could operate differently, that seeing people's humanity was viable. And we did that. We created a model that others are following, sparked a movement that's growing, changed the conversation about what business should be. That's not nothing. That's something extraordinary." Wilson walked to his desk, a different desk than the one he'd sat at 10 years ago, simpler and less ostentatious, and pulled out a piece of paper. It was worn and creased, having been folded and unfolded countless times. "I kept this," he said, handing it to Loveth. She unfolded it and recognized it immediately. The merger agreement with Stellar Tech Industries, the document she told him not to sign, the piece of paper that had changed both their lives. Wilson had never thrown it away. "Why?" she asked. "Because I never want to forget how close I came to destroying everything. I never want to forget that my success isn't because I'm smarter or better than anyone else. It's because someone who had every reason to stay silent chose to speak up. This document reminds me that what we build can be destroyed by a single bad decision, that vigilance is the price of integrity, that listening to the right people is more important than following the smarter strategy." Loveth held the paper, feeling its weight, not physical weight, but the weight of what it represented. One signature would have changed everything. One decision would have destroyed a man and enriched a trader. One moment of trust misplaced would have undone decades of work, but that hadn't happened. Because a poor cleaner had murmured, "Don't sign it," and a wealthy billionaire had listened. "You know what I think about when I look at this," Loveth said, still holding the document. "I think about all the times I stayed silent when I should have spoken up, all the injustices I witnessed and didn't challenge, all the moments when I chose safety over courage. This document represents the one time I got it right, but there were 100 times I got it wrong." "That's what makes this one time matter," Wilson replied. "Because courage isn't about being fearless all the time. It's about finding the strength to speak up at the moment when your voice is needed most. You got it right when it mattered, Loveth. That's what counts." She handed the document back to him. "Keep it. Remember it. But don't let it define you. You're not the man who almost made a terrible mistake. You're the man who listened when someone tried to help you avoid it. That's the story that matters." They stood together in the quiet office, two people whose lives had intersected in unexpected ways, whose partnership had created ripples that spread far beyond anything either of them could have imagined that first night. The city lights sparkled through the windows. Somewhere out there, children were dreaming of futures that might now be possible. Workers were going home to families they could afford to feed. Young people were attending colleges they never thought they could access. Companies were adopting policies that valued human dignity. Systems were slowly, incrementally changing, all because one person noticed what others missed, all because one person spoke when silence would have been safer, all because a poor cleaner murmured to a billionaire, "Don't sign it." And what happened next shocked everybody, not because it was dramatic or explosive, but because it was simple. A powerful man listened to a powerless woman. And that simple act of listening changed everything. Sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply seeing people who've been invisible. Sometimes the greatest wisdom comes from those society has dismissed. Sometimes courage is just a whisper in the right moment. And sometimes the poorest among us are rich in exactly what the wealthy need most: truth, integrity, and the clarity that comes from having nothing left to lose. This is the story of Loveth Okafor and Wilson Jaden, but it's also the story of every person who's been overlooked, underestimated, and rendered invisible. It's a reminder that everyone has value, everyone has wisdom, everyone deserves to be seen. May we all have the courage to speak truth when it matters, and may we all have the wisdom to listen. Thanks for watching, and please don't forget to click on the subscription box, comments, and like.